Hurricane Earl making landfall in Florida are arguably the #1 weather story here in the United States tonight, with perhaps a couple of exceptions, and we'll get into that here in just a minute. I'm Dave Schwartz. Welcome to this edition of Weather Center, a special edition from the Weather Channel to you. Here's a look at the hurricane, at least part of the hurricane. Actually, these thunderstorms in Florida that are producing tornadoes involved in the whole circulation around the hurricane, the center of which is to the southeast of Pensacola and is slowly moving toward the east or east-northeast. So far, the worst of it has been out here in the western panhandle, and that's where we're going right now. A Hurricane Earl update live from Panama City. Here's Bill Keneally.
All right, Dave, thanks a lot. My infinite wisdom said to come upstairs and find the balcony. Well, the rain is now swirling and it's coming in on us. Let's take a look out here, and the rain, Dave, is just really the awesome story right now. I just heard a report on the news that some subdivision in Panama City has had 17.5 inches of rainfall, and you know what, Dave? I vouch for them. It is raining 1 to 2 inches per hour. We had a little bit of a lull. That is long gone now. The good news is the wind is holding fairly strong out of the east. When I say that, I mean it's not allowing for the water to come in. The high tide just about on top of us, or it will be within the next half hour. But even though it's hitting the bulkhead on occasion, it is not near as bad as we had feared. But that said, I'm suspecting problems probably down the beach, down around, say, Apalachicola, Carabel, maybe St. George Island, and especially that Apalachee Bay. So, Dave, suffice to say, it's been pretty rough, but I think the worst, hopefully over with. The rain, the big issue. There could be a lot of flooding coming down the rivers the next few days here in the Panhandle. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Bill, for that live report. The worst may be over in Panama City now, or maybe in the next couple of hours, but our friends off to the east are going to have problems, and maybe even over into Jacksonville with some wind here tomorrow morning as perhaps the remnants of this hurricane move on by. Joining me now here at the Weather Channel is our hurricane expert, along with John Hope. You two make the core of our tropical department here at the Weather Channel, Dr. Steve Lyons. And Dr. Lyons, this has been an interesting hurricane to say the least. It's still causing big problems, though.
Yes, it is, and it'll continue to do that overnight, especially to the east of the center. And the center is now taking a little more of an east track than it had been. And so that's going to affect areas along the coast farther east than we had originally expected. Not extremely farther east, but just a little bit farther.
We'll get into the forecast here in just a minute. Let's have a look at this hurricane now on a Doppler radar, and maybe you can tell us where the eye of the hurricane is and what's going on underneath that yellow and orange.
Well, right now the circulation center is about right in here. It doesn't really have the classic eye, and this has been a very unusual hurricane, but the center is about right there, and there's very strong winds wrapping around into the circulation, generally in this direction. And in these rain bands, the wind above the ground has been very strong. Aircraft reconnaissance have found strong winds, and it mixes down those strong winds and very strong gusts in these thunderstorm bands. So as those bands move over you, you're going to get much, much stronger winds than you have away from the bands.
And as Bill was mentioning, he's got an offshore wind. He's right there in Panama City. But an easterly wind here is an onshore wind, St. George Island and right on up into the Big Bend. Major problems tonight.
Yes, and if this system continues to move generally this way, then they're going to get the southerly flow in here and produce a fairly large storm surge here. And that's why evacuation orders were recommended for the Big Bend area, and they feared that people didn't really take that evacuation order seriously. So if you're in any low-lying area in the Big Bend area now, and it's safe to evacuate, I would do so very quickly before the surge starts to come in there in the next probably 3 to 6 hours.
So east of Panama City, that's where the major problems are going to be.
Yes.
We also have some hurricane warnings, of course, that extend as far east as the Suwannee River. And keep in mind that the Tampa Bay is right here, so we've got a keen interest in the eventual track of this hurricane. If it moves inland or if it stays a little further south, that could have a great impact on our weather tonight. Tarpon Springs, St. Petersburg, the entire Bay Area.
Yes, and we've already seen some fairly gusty winds out here off the coast of Tampa, St. Petersburg on the order of 30 to 35 miles an hour. So if you're in a small vessel considering going fishing or going out, do not do it. It's very rough out there and highly dangerous situation.
Okay, well, that's a couple of elements of the storm, the heavy rain, the storm surge. Severe weather is also something that comes into play, too. We've had reports of tornadoes in Florida, the West Coast. Now, earlier, just a couple of hours ago on the East Coast and up to Alachua County. Let's check on radar here again and see what that looks like. We still have more thunderstorms forming here in, it looks like Brevard County and Palm Beach County, and that's all heading north. In Orlando, we're fine for the time being, and a thunderstorm just moved offshore just to the northeast of Daytona Beach, but this storm may have produced a tornado. That's the one that is moving out of the Gainesville area and up toward Jacksonville, where a tornado watch remains in effect until 11 o'clock here tonight.
And that's a rather unusual situation because we have very strong westerly winds aloft over the top of this system, and with a southerly wind at the surface and the westerly aloft, that produces big, what we call helicity, which is very favorable in conjunction with instability for producing severe weather, and that's what we're seeing.
The same type of dynamic that occurs in the plains in the spring.
Exactly, the same scenario.
Turning with height from south to west.
Correct.
Well, here we go. There's our hurricane. Notice to the west side of this thing, we've got very quiet weather. We can take a look out on the beach in Gulf Shores, Alabama right now, and we find that all there is high surf tonight. No wind, not much wind, and no rain.
Yeah, and you can see the tide is significantly above average, just breaking up along the seawalls there, and that's associated with a storm surge with the breaking waves themselves. That, of course, will be in conjunction with the storm surge farther off to the east of the storm system later. And those waves should continue the next 24 hours, very high.
Okay, now speaking further to the east, the hurricane is moving east or east-northeast at the present time. Who might have the impact from this later on tonight and tomorrow morning?
Well, the rain's going to continue to move on in South Georgia and northeast Florida. And we'll have to watch this thing as it continues to move to the northeast because it could potentially reform off the coast of the in the Atlantic Ocean here in another day or two. We'll see what's left of it as it moves off. That's not an impossibility. May have to put up some tropical storm warnings here if it continues to carry strength to the east coast of the United States.
So now it's a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, but it could cause problems with wind and surf and rain on the east coast potentially.
That's quite possible, especially considering basically the Florida Peninsula is very, very flat.
Dr. Steve Lyons, hurricane specialist here at the Weather Channel, thanks so much again for your expertise. And a reminder that you can check us out online at weather.com for more information on Hurricane Earl, the other hurricane in the Atlantic, and the other hurricane in the Pacific that'll be sending moisture into Arizona and California over the next couple of days. For those stories and the forecast for tomorrow, here's Terry Smith.
All right, Dave, thank you very much. And we're actually going to be focusing on some of the severe weather that we're still seeing at this hour across parts of the Northeast and down into the Southwest. Let's show you where we're talking about. And the good news...
Hurricane Earl is lashing parts of the Florida Panhandle tonight. This is Panama City, where strong wind and torrential rains have combined to put some areas underwater. Hello, I'm Dave Schwartz, and welcome to this edition of Weather Center, starring Hurricane Earl, our third hurricane of the Atlantic season. So far, one has made landfall officially. Earl will be number 2. Here's where it is as we check the satellite image. Very strong winds aloft blowing out of the southwest, blowing a lot of the clouds over Georgia, the Carolinas, and Alabama. There's no rain falling in there. The hurricane center is actually out over the water, and it's along the Florida Panhandle, now working into western Florida, where the rough stuff is here tonight. You can see that on our radar image here, too. The swirl, the low-level swirl of our hurricane, and the rain bands just coming right on in. By the way, tropical storm force winds have reached the west coast of Florida. St. Petersburg is now gusting to 40 miles per hour. Well, let's take a trip to Panama City, Florida. Bill Keneally's been standing by there all day. It's been one heck of a day, Bill, and it looks like it's still one heck of a night. What you got out there?
It sure is, Dave. The wave just caught my eye, by the way. It looks like our waves are a little bit higher right now. We've gotten just beyond high tide officially, but that said, we just did catch a wave go a little bit underneath us here at the balcony. But, I mean, it's no Hurricane Opal. The water has come up. It looks like it's flooding a little bit, but it's not that bad. The storm surge appears to be minimal. at best, thankfully. We do have an east wind out here. It looks like the Hurricane Earl, is going to pass just to our south, and I mean just to our south. Still very, very squally weather, though, as you can see. Some heavy, heavy rainfall and wind-driven rain at that. And Dave, the rain, the major aspect of this hurricane, phenomenal tallies of rain. I saw some of your Doppler shots earlier, and I got a confirmation, I might add, about 17.5 inches of rain reportedly at a subdivision just inland over there in Panama City. So we'll be watching these strong hurricane force winds, possibly clipping us for another hour or two, but hopefully things should start getting better beyond the midnight hour. Back to you, Dave.
Bill, thanks a lot. Rough weather on the western panhandle, and there's also some tornadoes going on in northeast Florida. We'll get to that here in just a second. But first, it's to our hurricane expert, Dr. Steve Lyons. You've been here all day. You've been watching hurricanes for years, and this is just the latest in a series. What's your feeling, overall feeling, before we get into the problems here tonight?
Well, right now the system is definitely weakening, which is great news. It continues to move to the east-northeast, but still at a relatively slow pace, and so rainfall is going to be a big problem. And we're still going to have some big storm surge starting about now and continuing the next 4 hours in the Big Bend area. So if you're in low-lying areas there, watch out.
Storm surge means that the actual sea level is rising.
That's right.
With the wave action on top of that.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's have a look at this thing on Doppler, and you can easily see the circulation and those heavy rain bands you were pointing out.
Yes, and of course Bill is up generally in this area here, and he's basically had east or southeast winds all evening, but this is the area here we're worried about right now. You can see the wind is out of the south here, very brisk. Very, very breezy, especially in these big thunderstorm areas here. And also there's some very high surf coming in here. And for the same winds, this area will produce twice the storm surge height as this area here. So if we have a 3 or 4 foot storm surge height here, we could have a 6 or 7 foot here. So we're expecting storm surges on the order of 8 to 12 feet in that area tonight.
Highway 98, for example, from Apalachicola around toward Panacea, Florida, not the best place to be here tonight, certainly.
No, I would be in somewhere hiding.
Now, our reporter, Bill Keneally, made reference to the rain, 17.5 inches, unofficially. Well, we've got Doppler estimates of, what, in excess of 8 inches, between 8 and 12 inches in this area right here, and sure enough, that's where Panama City is.
Exactly, and we're also seeing it continue in time. This is a loop, and you can see the rain extending inland through time, and these areas will notch up to different colors as they fill up, and so there's still more rain to come. Here's that band I was just showing you on the other image right there that's producing a very, very heavy amount of rain as thunderstorms continue along the same track there.
Looks like that's headed for Tallahassee. We've already had about 2 or 3 inches there.
Correct.
Okay, so that's water coming down from the sky. There's also a storm surge. That's, as you mentioned, and we've got that graphically depicted. I just wanted to show that one more time for the area to be affected. Out to the east, where the winds are coming in from the south or southeast, water piles up, and especially, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, as the coastline notches in like that, a lot of water is forced into a fairly narrow area, so it can really pile up back here.
That's absolutely correct. The coastal geometry is very, very important, and this is sort of very similar to the Bangladesh area in India, which is very, very storm surge prone. So we could have storm surge as high as 12 feet there tonight.
Now, our friends in Pensacola have a northeast wind, 50 miles an hour wind gust. It's windy in Mobile, Gulfport, New Orleans, some wind. Any problems for them tonight?
Really only the wind. There's very little in the way of rain. On the beach, there's still some strong surf, heavy surf out of the south. That was generated as the storm was over here, and it's continuing to impact. That's keeping the coastal wave height, water level, a little bit above normal, but not much.
Okay, so between the hurricane eye, or the center of the circulation, and the west coast of Florida, including Tampa and St. Petersburg, some problems yet tonight.
That's right.
A tornado watch remains in effect. Let's have a look at that. There was just a tornado warning issued for Jacksonville, and these storms have been developing and moving straight north or north-northeast at about 25 miles an hour. That's the cell right here. As we get in a little bit closer, we can have a look at that. Well, we'll just settle for what we have here. A tornado warning is in effect for downtown Jacksonville. It's coming in from Jacksonville Heights at the present time. A tornado has not been seen, but it may be there because of the Doppler radar signature. Okay, now the big question. Hurricane Earl, 80-mile-per-hour winds. Not a major hurricane by any means, but still a problem. where's it going?
It should continue on a northeastward track and then take a little more northward track. Right now, the Hurricane Center is thinking that it will stay over land the next 24 to 36 hours. That'll produce a lot of rain over Georgia and potentially the Carolinas the next 24 to 36 hours. But it doesn't look right now like it's going to reappear out into the Atlantic soon.
That would be great news if it wouldn't redevelop out there. But of course, we can't turn our back on it. Some flooding rains in the southeast, but it will continue to weaken if it stays over.
Absolutely. The hurricane force winds will die off very quickly within about 12 hours once the center moves inland.
Dr. Steve Lyons, thanks a lot. Get a good night's sleep tonight. Steve Ostro will be taking your place later on tonight to try to fill your shoes. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks for tuning in for this Hurricane Earl update. There's more severe weather going on across the country, too. For information on any of those weather items, check us out online at weather.com. Now into the studio for a look at other weather, plus tomorrow's forecast. Here's Paul Emick.
All right, thanks a lot, Dave. There have been several areas of severe weather tonight, as you've mentioned. Thunderstorms around L.A. earlier today, as well as a lot of major cities in the Northeast. Things, luckily, in most of the Northeast are getting just a bit quieter. Let's have a look at the big picture across the country.
The 6th, from 11 to 7. Along with our variety show, we'll be featuring a Fun for All carnival.
Come support us at Kathmandu and have some fun.
Every night we find a little more out about how the weather works and how it's going to turn out tomorrow. And that's what we bring to the viewers. It's the mystery of weather.
Right now it's your local forecast on the Weather Channel.
Tropical storm Earl became a hurricane earlier today and now is battering the coast of Florida, the Florida Panhandle. We've got the latest on Earl, also the latest on Hurricane Isis, which may impact those of you in the Southwest and Southern California, all part of storm watch plus severe weather in the states. Let's start it out now with the latest on Earl, and we will have a full rundown in the Forecast Center with Stu Ostro and Dave Schwartz coming up at the top of the hour at midnight Eastern, 11 Central. Here's the latest from the Hurricane Center about an hour ago. 29.5 north, 86.3 west, and that puts Earl just off the coast from Panama City, Florida, and our Bill Keneally estimated winds as high as 80 miles an hour in gust about 2 or 3 hours ago. It is moving east-northeast to 10. That hasn't changed, but the last advisory dropped the sustained winds from 100 miles an hour down to 80 miles an hour, and the pressure hasn't changed. It's holding steady at 986 millibars. So we still have a very dangerous situation here, not so much the wind per se, but the storm surge and the heavy rainfalls we've seen so far. We still have those hurricane warnings up for those of you watching from the Florida Panhandle all the way over towards Swanee River. Hurricane warnings continuing. And then we have the tropical storm warnings continuing from Swanee River south to Anclote Keys. That's just north of the St. Pete area, the Tampa-St. Pete area. Meanwhile, take a look at on satellite photography the tropical storm, which became the hurricane very quickly. In a day and a half's time, it went from just a tropical wave up to a hurricane, and it had sustained winds earlier of 100 miles an hour. The west side of this particular system, Earl, has never been much of a factor as far as bad weather. It's all been off to the east and north. In fact, you can see the higher cloud tops indicated by the reds and oranges north and east of the center of the circulation, which is right about here. This will continue to spread the heavy rain into Georgia and eventually into South Carolina. The other concern is we have a lot of spin in the atmosphere, and we have different wind directions at different heights, and that leads to rotation and the risk of tornadoes. And this is a very common occurrence when a tropical system such as a hurricane makes landfall. A tornado watch is issued. This one is up until 11 o'clock in the morning, so take heed with this. We have had a couple of tornadoes actually touch down across this part of Florida, even some wind damage earlier around Melbourne and Cape Canaveral. There's your radar, and the storms now moving through Jacksonville, right up towards Savannah along the I-95 corridor. Just a lot of rainfall now. Those of you around Tallahassee watching up towards Valdosta, you know what I'm talking about. It's raining at the rate of about 2 inches an hour, and that will continue for several more hours. Hurricane Danielle, no longer a factor, pulling well off the coast, and it's well south-southeast to Sable Island, Nova Scotia rather, and we've heard about the terrible plane crash in Nova Scotia, but it occurred near Halifax, and very unlikely that this hurricane had any direct impact on the crash of that airplane, at least because of the distance of the hurricane from Nova Scotia itself. We're watching this tropical wave across the Caribbean, bringing some showers and thunderstorms. Another batch of storms moving in towards the islands. Nothing either of these expected to develop over the next couple of days. We'll keep you posted. In fact, Hurricane Hunter aircraft took a look at this earlier on Wednesday and found nothing to be concerned with. Otherwise, from the islands off to the east, it is very, very quiet at this point. So we turn our attention to Hurricane Isis now, the latest in from the Hurricane Center, winds of 75 miles an hour sustained. So it is a minimal hurricane, but it's moving north at 12 and now right on land there. And as a result, we're seeing heavy rainfalls, and because of that, there's that risk of flash flooding in these hilly areas, these mountainous areas on the Baja and also on the coast of Mexico. That's one concern, also a big concern for marine interest. And we do have those tropical storm watches up, warnings up, and hurricane warnings in this area along the Baja coast of California. There is Isis continuing to move north. It may have an impact on your weather in the southwest and southern California in the next 3 to 4 days. Next up, your local weather, then a full update on Hurricane Earl.
I'm meteorologist Bill Keneally. We continue to await the